Reach for the sky, suckers. What is up, everybody? It's your buddy Brian, back for the second episode of the Spaghetti Western Jamboree. The Jamboree, where what do we talk about? We talk about spaghetti westerns, of course. Like the horror movie club stream, there's always a link to the movie in the description where you can watch it for free, uncensored. And man, right now it's a really, really good time to be a spaghetti western fan. For one thing, the DVDs and Blu-rays that are coming out are spectacular. I know that Arrow recently came out with a bunch. You got Severin doing their thing, Vinegar Syndrome. Tubi right now just had a massive, I was about to say massive dump, but really, then I was like, well, how can I clean up that massive load? No, let me just say a substantial number of Italian Westerns have recently been uploaded on Tubi. And these are really beautiful prints. I mean, not all of them, but like certainly all of the spaghettis that are worth watching, shall I say. Beautiful widescreen prints, really a great time to be a spaghetti Western fan. Back in the day, man, you only had a very limited number of these films available to you on television. Obviously, the Sergio Leone movies played all the time, right? So Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More, Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I remember seeing those on TV a lot when I was a kid. Occasionally, you might see like a Sergio Corbucci movie like The Mercenary, but never something like Django. And, never the Sartana films. The Trinity movies, which we're going to be talking about tonight, were occasionally on television. And probably the Bud Spencer and Terence Hill movies that were on TV when I was a kid the most. And most people, certainly most Americans, first encountered Bud Spencer and Terence Hill, the Team Supreme, through tonight's movie, which of course is They Call Me Trinity. Wow. When it came out, and but not for the reasons that something like Django was controversial. Django, of course, blood-soaked. The spaghetti westerns, like the Leone films, for instance, in the Dollars trilogy, there's certainly a lot of humor, but it's always gallows humor. It's always black humor. And it's always paired with a heaping helping of the ultra-violence. And those films were considered, in their day, ultra-violent. Nowadays, of course, people hardly bat an eyelash because what's happening? Guys are being shot and going, oh! You know, you're not seeing big bullet holes, big giant bullet squibs, blood everywhere. You know, it's not like the Long Riders or something like that, where, you know, or the Wild Bunch by Sam Peckinpah, which are practically, especially Wild Bunch, is practically a splatter movie. It's so blood-soaked. But, you know, the spaghettis were dark. They were violent. Nobody was safe. They would murder little children. Henry Fonda in Once Upon a Time in the West as Frank Booth. His first scene in the movie, he murders a child. You couldn't do that in an American Western. Nobody would even think of doing something that fiendish. And certainly not having Henry Fonda pulling the trigger, of all people, right? Priests. If you remember the clergy in the Spaghetti West, watch out. You are not safe. You are not safe. You know, you occasionally might see priests get it in some of the American Westerns, but nowhere nearly as much as the spaghettis. In fact, very often the bad guys take a certain delight in murdering members of the clergy. And also, you know, maybe that was a little bit of the filmmakers taking out their anger on the Catholic Church, which they felt let them down because they sided with Mussolini and the fascisti. If you've never studied any Italian history, definitely read up on it a little bit. It helps you understand the Italian Westerns so much better, and the Italian horror films too. Why so much sadism? Lots of cruelty and sadism in the spaghetti westerns. And I found out that that was kind of the filmmakers' way of processing the trauma that they had experienced during World War II and living under a fascist government, under Il Duce, who got his comeuppance, of course. Hey, Tommy, I see you in the chat. What up, Phil? See you in the chat. Frankie, of course. I knew I was going to see you, bro. First of all, we're talking about Italian movies. Frankie, of course, loves him. Some Italian cinema and also some Bud and Terrence. Hopefully Sim will drop by too, because I know he loves some Bud and Terrence too. And yeah, let me get into it. Let me get into it because I've just been monologuing. And hopefully not in a boring way. You know, I do try to make myself useful. Let me just put it that way. And share what knowledge I've gleaned. Well, I was talking about like how hard it was to see a lot of these films when I was a kid, and how there was oh, you know what was another one they used to show on TV when I was a kid was A Minute to Pray, A Second to Die. They would show that sometimes. And that was when I started to become aware that it wasn't just Sergio Leone that was making Westerns, that there were other directors. And, you know, and later on, of course, discovered Sergio Corbucci, Sergio Sollima. It's a bit of a joke in spaghetti Western fandom circles that when you meet somebody and they're, or if you have a friend, anybody that's interested in exploring Italian Westerns, basically what you tell them is watch any movie that's directed by a guy named Sergio, right? Because, of course, you had Sergio Leone, who did the Dollars trilogy, Duck You Sucker, Once Upon a Time in the West. You had Sergio Corbucci, who did Django, The Mercenary, Compañeros, Sonny and Jed, The Great Silence. And Sergio Sollima, who did The Big Gun Down, and also Run Man Run, which is a sequel to that. But let's see. Frankie says, I think some of those spaghetti westerns were borderline horror. Yes, they were. And the reason for that, the reason why, well, I mean, that's actually a bit of a subgenre is are the horror spaghettis. That's to say, you had a lot of directors that were coming off of doing horror films, because the way it worked in the Italian film industry was the directors were workmen, very blue collar sort of an attitude. And the Italian film industry was very sort of all or nothing. When they got into a trend, they got into a trend, right? Like when they were making peplums, sword and sandal movies, they were making like almost nothing but peplums. Then they switched to Gothic horror. That was the big thing. Then they switched to the spaghettis, right, to the westerns. And then after that, the poliziotteschi, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which were like the crime movies, and then back to horror again. And so you had these directors that you mainly think of as horror directors, like Lucio Fulci, directed at least 3 or 4 Italian westerns. Let's see, there was 4 of the Apocalypse, which is pretty brutal, pretty nasty. It has a little cannibalism in it. Definitely some brutal sadism. He also did Massacre Time, which also has a lot of brutality and sadism in it. And A Bullet for Sandoval, right? These are like pretty mean, nasty movies, but of course that worked in with you know the general tone of the spaghettis. But then you get the horror spaghettis, which are like Antonio Margheriti's and God Said to Cain. That's practically a horror film with Klaus Kinski in it, no less, chewing up the scenery. Django Kill, If You Live, Shoot is widely regarded also as a horror spaghetti. That has a lot of really striking horror imagery in it. And what's Cutthroats 9? Cutthroats 9 is practically a splatter movie. In fact, for that, they shot extra scenes of gore, I think possibly for the Japanese market. I'm not entirely sure, because the Japanese, of course, ate this stuff up. And if you are a fan of movie poster art, the Japanese posters are some of the best and the most beautiful. Although the Italian posters are far away the best, because they're paintings. They're these beautiful paintings. It's not like today where, you know, you look at a movie poster and it's like some piece of shit that's some a-hole in a cubicle somewhere, just like photoshopped in like 5 minutes. Yeah, Frankie says the detective horrors were called giallo, yellow films, because in Italy, pulp fiction books had yellow covers. Yes, that is true. That is true. And actually, one thing I just recently learned is, I think I just learned this yesterday. The reason Italian comics are called fumetti is because they looked at the word balloons and thought they looked like puffs of smoke. Right? So no fumar, no fumetti. Okay. I never had that never occurred to me before. But yeah, tonight's movie really kind of signaled a sea change in the life of the Italian horror film. A lot of people felt, well, pretty pissed off. Sergio Leone and Sergio Corbucci, I know both of them were really, really not happy with this movie. They really kind of felt like it was, I think Corbucci actually came out and said it was a moral blow to the Italian Western. I think, you know, I got to call bullshit on that. You know, much respect to you, Sergio's, you know, not to diss on you or anything. But I was talking about this with Phil before today, that very often a genre is clearly like in the decline when it switches to satire, right? When it devolves into satire. You look at the American horror movies of the 80s, for instance, and those just got goofier and goofier and goofier. Best example, of course, is the Evil Dead trilogy, which the first movie is just a balls-out horror movie, maybe a teeny bit of humor, but just brutal and out to get you. Then Evil Dead 2, which is like almost a comedy with some horror elements. And then you get Army of Darkness, which really is not a horror movie even in the slightest. It's just a pure parody at that point. Of course, the best example right now that we have right in front of us are the freaking Marvel movies, right? When those started getting goofier and goofier, I think with Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, they actually were doing reshoots to make the movie goofier. They felt that like the third act was a little too serious. And so they're like, no. Well, people used to be, to see a fantasy adventure. Then, they're not coming to see superheroes, kick bad guys in the ass. They're coming to laugh. And I think that might partly be true, but you got to give people a little something more than what they're getting. I mean, if you've seen that MODOK, man, I think that will be remembered as the death knell of the Marvel superhero movies. I mean, not to say that these characters are going anywhere. They'll be around and they'll be hitting the reboot button periodically, and that, and boy, they need to hit that sucker fast. But yeah, Frankie says everybody I know in Italy smokes. This is all right. Total non sequitur. I've never been to Italy. My parents lived in Italy and both spoke fluent Italian. They were moved there by my father's company, Mercedes-Benz, and they lived in Roma. And my father actually went to Cinecittà Studios where they were shooting Peplums. And so if you were a tourist or a businessman or just like fucktard off the street, they would let you in to watch a movie being shot. First of all, they were shooting without sound, but they also didn't want to be distracted. So they only had one rule, and that was silencio. But you could hang out and watch like Steve Reeves, like throw around, styrofoam boulders or paper mache boulders, I should say. Let's see. Let me bring up tonight's movie because, wow. Yeah. The Italian Westerns did get goofy after, not so much after the first Trinity movie, but it was the sequel, the Trinity Is Still My Name, that really kind of made the film producers go, okay, the people want the comedy, so now we make Western comedy. There were still a few outliers. There were still a few of what I and some other people refer to as the Twilight spaghettis. These are Italian Westerns that were made like in the late 70s. They have a very elegiac tone and feel to them. Good examples of that are Keoma. That's considered the last great Italian Western. California, that's a really good one. Menage, A Man Called Blade, that's also pretty good. If you're a fan, I always tell people that if you are interested in exploring this subgenre, always start out with the Leone movies because they are clearly the best. But one of the reasons I'm not going to talk too much about the Leone movies on this live stream is because they've been discussed to death, right? Got a couple books here that I recommend. 10,000 God, I can't even speak today. 10,000 Ways to Die by Alex Cox, who was the director of Repo Man. And this is basically his senior thesis at film school, but cleaned up. Like, I remember downloading a PDF of this in its raw form, I don't know, 20 years ago. This is an excellent volume, highly recommended. And this is really the best resource for non-Leone spaghettis, because the main book that had been written was Sir Christopher Frayling wrote a book called Something to Do with Death. And that goes into Leone's films. And so these books touch upon the Leone movies, but they don't go deep into them. They focus their attention on the non-Leone spaghettis, which deserve so much attention because, my goodness, there are some great films in here. But the best thing about this book, you can tell it's like falling apart. And the binding's pretty good, too. It has a glossary in the back of spaghetti Western character actors. So you ever thought, because you're going to see a lot of the same faces in these films, especially in the background, especially the bad guys and the bad guys' goons, right? Because a lot of those cats were Spanish stuntmen. And those dudes were freaking lunatics, like, savages. That would, I mean, if you look at the stunt work in some of these films, it's pretty damn impressive. But let me bring up tonight's movie. There's a Japanese poster for it. Trinity is, they call me Trinity. I almost said Trinity is still my name. So you got a good shot of our hero, Terrence Hill. And of course, one of the things I always do is I always try to find fan art. This is a pretty good example. Here's the German poster. Die rechte und die linke Hand des Teufels. The right and the left hands of the devil. Which are actually what the characters are known as in this film. Terrence Hill, that's a rather novel spelling. Terrence Hill and Bad Spencer. I think this might be from, I don't know where this is from. I know you can buy it on eBay. It's like one of the things I always do is I go to eBay to find the dope foreign posters. Here's a modern poster. That's okay. And here is one of the Italian posters. Oh, yeah, check these out. These are Bud Spencer, Terrence Hill, Trinity, and Bambino action figures. I can't say I'm really crazy about the sculpts, especially the Bud. The Bud doesn't look too good. But still, the fact that these even exist is kind of awesome. Terrence is a little more on point. There's an American poster. So, where do I start with Bud Spencer and Terrence Hill? Bud Spencer and Terrence Hill were a comedy duo, kind of an action comedy duo that kind of picked up from where I think the big duo was. I'm not familiar with these movies at all, but there was a comedy duo called Franco and Ciccio. In fact, I think they made a goofy spaghetti Western at some point. And Terrence Hill and Bud Spencer had been in a trilogy of Westerns before the Trinity films. The first one, all three directed by Giuseppe Colizzi. And they played these two characters named Cat Stevens and Hutch. Now, if you're thinking Cat Stevens, that sounds familiar. Isn't there like a pop star that was named Cat Stevens and then changed his name to Yusuf Islam? Yes. He got his name from Terrence Hill's character in God Forgives, I Don't. So that was a hit. And then they went on to make Ace High, which is fantastic. And Boot Hill was the last in the series, which isn't as good as Ace High, but is still a really solid spaghetti. Terrence Hill's real name was Mario Girotti, and he was born to a Italian father and a German mother. He was born in Venice. During World War II, his parents decided to send him to his mother's family in Germany because of the bombing that was happening in Italy. Where was his mother's family? Where did his parents send him to get away from the bombing? Dresden. The largest mass killing in human history. Yeah, he survived the Dresden bombing, which is, oh man, he must have had a guardian angel looking out for him. He was kind of like a handsome, blue-eyed leading man, kind of like a Franco Nero. In fact, he starred in a Django ripoff, and it was called Django Prepare a Coffin. And I got a little clip of it right. Actually, I have a clip not of the movie, but you get a nice shot of the poster art and the music. Now, tell me if this sounds familiar to you. Yeah. Ringing any bells? Maybe I'm crazy. Yeah, dude, this is the riff from that Gnarls Barkley song. Got it. Anyway, I love playing that. It's a great piece of music. So he wasn't exactly a comedy actor out the gate. Neither was Bud Spencer. But they had a very special chemistry, which we will be getting into. Now, Bud Spencer was the stage name of a Carlo Pedersoli. And Carlo was a Olympic swimmer from Napoli. And he was in the Olympics, but his team lost that year. And the next year, the Italian team won. And he wasn't on that team, so he was butthurt about that for like the rest of his life. But he went into acting after his career as an athlete was over, and there was something about him and Terence Hill. There was a special chemistry there, and Terence Hill himself said that big screen couples are rare because they can't be manufactured. That's to say, you could throw Jackie Chan together with Chris Tucker or whoever, but that doesn't mean that you're going to get anything special. It's something that you can't fake the funk, is what I'm saying. And these guys had the funk to the nth degree. They just... there was something about them that just clicked. And so I think if I were to venture a guess, they must have made at least about 20 movies together. And then they would do solo films too. Buddy Goes West. That's a really good, post Trinity spaghetti Western with Bud Spencer. Yes, that's right. I'm sorry. Thank goodness I have my notes tonight. This is me without my ADD medication.